Santa baby, slip a sable. What actually is a sable? A sable is a small graceful carnivore of the weasel family, found in the forests of northern Asia and is highly valued for its fine fur. Oh, so she's not saying that she wants a sable as a pet, she's saying she wants to skin it and use its fur as a coat. Well, that's just grim, isn't it? Hey there guys, my name's Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back for another terrifying episode of Killer Weekend, where each week we'll discuss a true crime case and you guys can feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments box below. I'm gonna take it too far with these earrings, aren't I? If you like all things true crime, UFO, supernatural, conspiracy theory, and all that good stuff in between, then please hit that subscribe button. I'll be here for you every weekend with our true crime killer weekends, and on and off every couple of Wednesdays with our weirdo Wednesdays, where I'll discuss something spooky I've heard. Hello my little festive bunnies, I hope you're well. I hope Santa Claus is coming to town. Do you know what I think that was actually? I think that was a Freudian slip because my mother is called Sandra. So I hope Santa, not Sandra, not my mum, treated you well and you got loads of presents. Were you spoiled? I had a lovely Christmas. My mum cooked us a beautiful homemade meal and then me and my fiance stayed the night in a hotel. It was very bougie. I felt like Zach and Cody but without the questionable bowl haircuts. You know you're getting old at Christmas time when the highlight of your gifts is your comfortable new PJs. I'll give you a little sneak peek because look at the tassels, look at the cowl neck. I feel like a sexy widow whose husband died in a mysterious boating accident. But as the Christmas season sadly draws to a close, it means we're closer and closer to New Year's Eve, or as we call it here in Scotland, Hogmanay. It's a time in my hometown for wee lassies and laddies to get steaming with their pals, and if you're up the dancing, you grab yourself a belter for a Hogmanay winch. But for two young partygoers in Marlborough, New Zealand, the night of New Year's Eve 1997 would end in terror and would also reconfirm the number one Megan true crime rule, which is don't talk to strangers. However, I'm gonna be a wee tease, and before we dive into this week's infamous case, we have a word from today's sponsor. Guys, you know I like to fancy myself as a real-life amateur detective. So when I found June's Journey, I grabbed my magnifying glass and my detective's coat and thought, sign me up. June's Journey is an amazing mystery-solving game that is free to download and will provide you with hours of sleuthing fun, finding hidden objects, and maybe even solving a family murder. The 1920s setting is bright and colourful and interactive and will literally transport you into each chapter. You'll find yourself searching for much needed clues and perhaps there'll be some time for romance along the way. I love taking some me time in between researching for my cases and switching off with a good old mystery. So if you're looking for an exciting new escape, then download June's Journey free now. Download June's Journey free by clicking on the link in the description box below. June's Journey is available on all iOS and Android mobile devices as well as the PC through the Facebook games. Start playing now and let June make a detective out of you. Now back to the episode, because this week's case is so confusing, it will literally leave you questioning your whole life. Maybe not your whole life, I'm probably just being a wee bit dramatic on that one. Anywho, without further delay, let's discuss the maybe murder of Olivia Hope and Ben Smart. To begin this troubling tale of woe, we must journey back to a little sexy time I like to call 1997, when the Spice Girls were dominating the pop music culture. Spice up your life. The same year that Baz Luhrmann turned Leonardo DiCaprio into every woman's skinny boy malnourished fantasy when he played the famous Romeo Montague in Romeo and Juliet. Also, how good was that scene with the fish tank where they're like back and forth? Oh, classic. I'm kissing you. But along with the highs, we also had the lows. The tragic loss of our Princess Diana and also the murder of fashion designer Gianni Versace. Speaking of fashion, 1997 was the time to be alive because this is when we had inflatable, everything. We had inflatable pillows, inflatable backpacks, inflatable sofas, inflatable armchairs. The word inflatable is starting to sound really strange now. If you could blow it up with a mouthpiece, it was on trend. Also, let's not forget the gorgeous fashion statement of jelly shoes. Oh yes, ladies, when you stepped off the plane in Lanzarote wearing these rubber heels, you knew it was going to be the holiday of a lifetime. Team those showstoppers with some butterfly hair clips and some clear lip gloss, and you had yourself ready for a sexy night out of doing the Macarena. But for those who were lucky enough to come from affluent families in 1997 in New Zealand, their New Year celebrations were very different. One of those people was 17-year-old Olivia Hope. Olivia Hope was born in 1981 and was the second child of Janice and Gerald Hope. Olivia was lucky enough to be raised alongside her sister Amelia, and the two were extremely close. As the girls grew into their teenage years, they slowly let go the sibling rivalry and the childish arguments, and it wouldn't be strange to see the two of them out on a night out with their mutual friends. Gerald Hope, the girls' father, was a very powerful man. He shared a keen interest in politics and even served as mayor from 1998 to 2001. He was also a chief executive of a research centre. Janice, Olivia's mother, managed a local winery in which Olivia worked part-time there too. Imagine working in a winery at the age of 17. For me, that would have been dangerous. I'm ready for work, mum. Gerald and Janice had high expectations for both their daughters, and Olivia did not disappoint. She was an extremely talented classical pianist, and she was even given the opportunity to travel to Hawaii with our female choir. A clever cookie, Olivia was accepted to study law at Otago University. But she had her doubts about moving away from her family. She had even expressed to her mother that she was concerned about getting severely homesick, as she was a homebody and loved being around her close family and friends. Her father, Gerald, would describe her as a strong young woman with realistic goals. And even though, yes, the Hope girls were extremely privileged, their parents made sure that they always worked part-time so that they knew the value of hard work and the value of money. Because Olivia knew that she would soon be going off to college, she wanted to spend as much time as possible with her sister and her family, and her friends too, which is why on the New Year's Eve of 1997, she decided to do just that. Olivia and her sister and their mutual friends had arranged to party the night away at the local Furno Lodge. After this, they would charter a yacht named the Tamarack and all sleep there. It was pre-arranged that Olivia and her pals all chipped in money so that they could sleep on this yacht, a night of luxury, and then the next morning at 9 a.m, Olivia's parents would collect both she and Amelia. The Furno Lodge was a popular stomping ground each Christmas season for people from all walks of life, and in fact it was the place that Olivia had met 21-year-old Ben the year before. In a case of young, innocent summer romance, Olivia Hope and Ben Smart met through mutual acquaintances. They started off as friends first, kind of sharing a drunken kiss here and there underneath the Marlborough sunset. But with their 4-year age gap, the two were in completely different stages in their lives. In fact, Ben was in his 3rd year at the Christchurch Polytech University, and he wasn't looking for anything serious at that time. Because of this, despite their fiery connection, the young couple decided to remain just good friends. But on the New Year's Eve of 1997, it would appear that fate had other plans. On that evening, unbeknownst to the two of them, Olivia and Ben slowly started gravitating towards each other like magnets. Ben would even pay a pretty pricey fee for a water taxi just to make it across to the Furno Lodge, where Olivia happened to be partying. I mean, he totally didn't even know Olivia would be there though. But there she was, this blonde, gorgeous, sun-kissed teenager, and here he was, this cool, dark-haired surfer dude, meeting up in the exact same spot as all those months before. Despite a few bumps along the road and a few kisses with other random people before that, the two managed to get together right as the clock struck midnight. Friends would see the young couple kissing in the garden bar at around 1:30 a.m. and by the time 3:30 a.m. rolled around, the two were ready to call it a night and decided to head back to the paid-for bunk in the Tamarack yacht. But as they say, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, because when Olivia and Ben arrived back at the Tamarack, other people who hadn't paid were sleeping in her bunk. Annoyed, and rightly so, Olivia shook the people awake and told them, hey, I've paid for this room, get the hell out. But them being drunk and belligerent just laughed it off, and Olivia and Ben had nowhere to sleep. Side note, but this is exactly why I do not go out on New Year's Eve. Nothing ever goes to plan, and next thing you know it, I'm barefoot walking down the main road at night, crying my eyes out because I can't get a taxi home. As Olivia and Ben are stranded and exhausted in the middle of the water, the only thing for it is to get a water taxi back to the mainland. Just as they were ready to leave, a water taxi being driven by a man named Guy Wallace pulled up carrying Olivia's sister Amelia, her friend Rick Goddard, a man named Hayden Morrissey, and his partner Sarah Dyer. But who's that passenger, the guy with the shaggy looking hair, sitting in the back of the taxi? A mystery man? Or was he? As Amelia and Rick got onto the Tamarack, it was decided that Olivia and Ben would take their place on the water taxi and head back to the mainland to try and find a room for the night. At this point, Guy Wallace lets out a chuckle and states that the couple have absolutely no chance of finding a room back on the mainland. These rooms are booked up for months in advance before the New Year's Eve parties. And it's at this point that the mystery man in the back pipes up and says that he has a room on his boat they can sleep in. The two young friends thankfully accept, but it's at this point that the man's tone takes a shift, and that's when he says, looking straight at Ben, "Not you, just her. She can stay alone." Guy Wallace said that this comment gave him chills all over. However, Ben and Olivia, being drunk and probably not thinking too clearly, laughed it off as a badly timed joke, and off they went to the mystery man's boat. As they arrived at the boat at around 4 a.m, Guy Wallace took note of some of the details. It was a large 2-masted boat with a blue stripe and white detailing. And just like that, the couple were on the boat and Guy sailed off to his next stop. Little did he know that as he looked over his shoulder, he would be the last person to see Olivia and Ben. Guy would actually later say that the image of Olivia's face in the moonlight as he sailed away would haunt him forever. The morning of January 1st, 1998 drifted by in a sea of hangovers and walks of shame along the port, but a couple of parents were deeply concerned at the same time. Olivia Hope's family were expecting her to be ready by 9 a.m, but she never turned up. Even more concerning, Olivia never turned up for her afternoon shift at the winery. And yeah, Olivia was a young teenage girl, and sometimes, like most of us when we were teenagers, she would overdo it on the old sauce, but she would always turn up for work, whether she was hungover or not. At the same time, Ben Smart's family started to wonder why their son hadn't arrived back home either. Ben's father was a civil engineer, and he was based in glamorous places such as Saudi Arabia and the Maldives, but because of this, Ben had spent quite a lot of his teenage years in boarding schools far away from his family. So because of this, it wasn't strange for them to go a couple of days without hearing from him. Ben Smart was a talented musician and was a guitarist in a band called Exit. It wasn't actually a strange occurrence to see Ben walking around Marlborough with a guitar strapped to his back. The band had been so successful that they had been asked to play several gigs around New Zealand that Christmas season. Olivia's father, Gerald, upon learning that Ben was also missing, just had the feeling that something wasn't right. And luckily, because of his political connections, he had a great deal of law enforcement resources at his fingertips. In all fairness, this is actually one of the most impressive reactions to a missing persons case I have ever seen. But before you get too excited, don't get your hopes up, because I promise you'll be shouting at your iPhone, your laptop, your TV screen, wherever you're watching this, in moments to come. One main issue with this case was alcohol. 99% of all of the people involved in this case were either intoxicated or belligerently drunk. Guy Wallace, the water taxi driver, was one of the only sober people in this whole investigation, and therefore a lot of pressure was put on him to discover who this mystery man was that the couple stayed with that night. At first, Guy Wallace described the man as a skinny, drawn-in looking man with dishevelled, medium-length hair. He also had stubble, which was quite thick, but not thick enough to be called a beard. And from this description, a composite sketch was released. People in the Furnell Lodge also had their own theories about this mystery man. Or was it men? Several guests at the Furnell Lodge that night remember seeing a man who matched the composite sketch accosting women and starting fights. However, other guests remember another young man who was embarrassing himself that night. His name was Scott Watson, and Scott Watson was a far cry from the high society that Olivia and her family would normally associate themselves with. There's been a lot of focus placed on previous criminal convictions, 48 to be exact, that Scott Watson had against his name, but I will mention just briefly that only one of these convictions was for a violent offence, but we'll get into that a bit later. So why Scott Watson? Why was he now on police's radar? Well, wouldn't you know that when Scott Watson saw law enforcement and Olivia's family making a public appeal to anyone who was in the area that night, he decided to come forward, and it was he himself that handed himself into police. A lot of people say that this must prove that he is innocent. What kind of crazy person would hand themselves into police when they were not even looking at him in the first place at all? But we have seen this before with serial killers who insert themselves into the criminal investigation just to find out exactly what police know. So was Scott Watson digging for information, or was he just simply being a helpful man? Investigators weren't so sure on this one. Did Scott match the description of the man in the drawing? No, he didn't. At the time of the disappearance, Scott Watson was clean shaven and had short to medium length hair, a far cry from the transient vibes that were being served by the mystery man on the boat. But hey, it was New Year's Eve. People were drunk. It was dark. They couldn't match up the face to Scott Watson's. But what about the mystery boat? Water taxi driver Guy Wallace remembered dropping Olivia and Ben off at a specific type of boat. It had blue and white detailing. It was large. It had 2 masts. And well, Scott Watson had this. Maybe if you squint like really... No, it's not the same boat. But let's remember, it was pitch black outside. They were in the middle of the water. Had Guy Wallace been mistaken? Well, his written statement about the boat may suggest that, because he had placed a large question mark next to the word ketch. And for all those non-sailors out there like myself, a ketch is a double-masted sailboat. Did this odd use of punctuation mean the guy wasn't sure how many masts the boat had? Maybe he was wrong, but it wasn't just Guy that had seen the mystery boat over the New Year weekend. No, in fact, 16 other witnesses had come forward to local law enforcement to say that they had saw a boat that exactly matched the description that Guy provided. Most importantly, some witnesses even recalled seeing a young blonde woman matching Olivia's description on the boat on the morning of January 1st, 1998. Now, you would think that police would hear these witness testimonies and rule out Scott Watson as a possible suspect, but no, they felt like all 16 witnesses were mistaken. Now, I can totally understand if it was maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe even 5 people who came forward with this information, but we're talking about over a dozen people here who were local to the area and would spot a boat that was out of place. One thing investigators would try to use to discredit this line of inquiry was the fact that Guy Wallace was no boatie and he couldn't tell a yacht from a dinghy. They said Guy Wallace was extremely seasick and the only reason he was on the water taxi that night was because he'd been asked to cover for someone as a favour. So police couldn't match the boat to Scott Watson. How about another try at matching the composite sketch? Law enforcement decided to present the witnesses with a photo lineup, including a photo of Scott Watson. And on the first try, nobody recognised Scott Watson, and you think they would have just moved on, but obviously not, because in the words of Rick Astley, they were never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down. Well, I'm pretty sure they let Scott Watson down and the families of the victims, but because of their determination, they decided to try again and add a photo of Scott that was less than flattering into a second lineup. In this photo, Scott Watson's eyes were kind of blinded by a flash, so they were half open, and he looked extremely different from his regular face. The best way to describe this photo is, I'm sure we all have that one friend, right? She posts gorgeous pictures of herself all over Instagram, all over Snapchat, and then there's you in the photos standing next to her. Your eyes are half shut, you've got 10 chins, and you look like Quasimodo, but she doesn't care because she looks like a babe. Well, the police did that to Scott Watson. This was his Quasimodo photo. So not only has a second photo of Scott been shown to these witnesses, making it more likely that they will choose him out of a lineup through familiarity, then we also have a photo that has been manipulated to make him look more like the composite sketch. Do we see the problem here? Well, you will soon, because just like that, someone recognised Scott Watson. Or they kind of did. They said his eyes looked extremely similar to the eyes in the composite sketch and the half-closed eyes of the man on the boat that night. Now, with a new favourite suspect, law enforcement went out to search Scott's boat, which was named Blade. Oh, Scotty boy, you're really not doing yourself any favours there. Initially, the search on the boat seemed quite promising. Upon entering the boat, the smell of bleach and cleaning products was overwhelming. Everything had been cleaned. Even Scott's cassette music tapes had been wiped down. For all those fetuses out there that don't know what a cassette tape is, it's a little rectangular plastic box that has tape in it, which plays music. My first tape was one that I stole from my sister during one of our many standoffs, and it was by Princess Superstar, a song called Bad Babysitter. I'm a bad babysitter, got my boyfriend in your shower. She was such a talented artist. There was also circular round holes cut out of a foam cushion on the boat, which police believed to be blood spatter that was forcibly removed. One piece of evidence that will make anyone's stomach turn was scratch marks on a hatch in the boat, which police believed was fingernail marks of someone trying to escape. We also had smear marks down the side of the boat, which police believed was the marks of when somebody threw a body overboard. The creme de la creme of evidence would be found on a tiger blanket. The tiger print blanket had hundreds of unknown hairs on it, and when tested, 2 of those hairs were discovered to have been from Olivia Hope or someone sharing familial DNA with Olivia. So we had the fingernail marks, we had the smears on the side of the boat, we had the tiger print blanket. Did this prove that Scott Watson had extremely bad taste? Yes, it did. But did it prove that he was a killer? Well, not quite, because most of the evidence could be explained away quite easily. The marks on the outside of the boat, Scott Watson said they were created by weeds, which were apparent in the bay where he had his boat parked. There was also the scratches on the hatch, remember? That made us all feel a little bit sick. Well, Scott and his sister claimed that on hot, warm, humid days, he would prop it open with a wooden stick, which would often scratch it. We have the holes, which investigators believed had been forcibly cut out because they contained blood spatter. Well, not quite. Scott said that on one occasion a party had gotten a little bit too rowdy, and this was in fact cigarette burn holes that had been left on the cushion. All of these explanations are totally plausible, and this was even further backed up when Olivia's own father, Gerald, decided that he himself wanted to visit the Blade boat. And he said that upon searching through the boat, that he believed that Olivia and Ben would have been able to escape that boat without a problem. He knew his daughter wasn't killed on this vessel. But what about that blanket and the 2 hairs of Olivia's that were found on it? Well, not all was what it seemed, because if you remember a couple of episodes ago, I talked about a book by Dr. Marie Cassidy, which went into great detail about the issues in cross-contamination that occurred mainly before the late 1990s. This evidence was no exception to that rule. You see, the first time the blanket was tested, nothing, nada, only Scott Watson's hairs could be found. However, when they tested it again, that's when they found Olivia's 2 hairs. But being prepped at the exact same time, on the exact same table, was a grip seal bag of Olivia's hair, which had been taken from a hairbrush in her home. And in the bag was a large slit right at the bottom where hair could have easily fallen out. What are the chances? Well, quite high if you ask me, and extremely high when you consider the fact that the hairs inside the grip seal that belonged to Olivia were never counted. So, were law enforcement successful due to better testing the second time around, or was this more likely due to cross-contamination and awful storage of DNA evidence? But why Scott Watson? Why not take the time to catch the real scruffy man out there? Let's not forget that Olivia Hope's family were extremely influential, and because of this, media attention was growing on the case, and the public began to wonder, why are law enforcement not catching this guy? However, even though the evidence thus far would lead us to believe the Scott Watson scapegoat theory, there is also other evidence that cannot be ignored. We also have the fuzzy details on how Scott Watson arrived home that night. If he wasn't the creepy man who looked like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo on Guy Wallace's water taxi, then how did he get back to Blade? According to witness statements, there was no other taxi driver who could have taken him home during this time. It was said that he arrived back at his boat at around 4 a.m. in the morning, and the only two boat drivers that were on duty was a man named Robert Mullen and then also Guy Wallace. Robert Mullen was adamant he never took Scott Watson home. So was Scott Watson the mystery man on the boat that night? It would seem that way, unless you're listening to the testimony of Donald Anderson, another water taxi driver who would later come out and say he is almost positive that he dropped Scott back off at the Blade at around 2:30 a.m. Not only this, an interview that would take place years later would also poke holes in police's theory. A man named John Mullen, who was the father of water taxi driver Robert Mullen, said that he felt coerced by police at the time into giving them a direct timeline, but he couldn't really remember what time he went home at, so he very well could have been the person that dropped Scott off at his boat. Now, this is quite a controversial interview because several people who believe that Scott Watson is guilty also believe that the interviewers were taking advantage of an elderly man who wasn't in his right mind during this interview. Was John Mullen in a fit mental state? And was he okay to be interviewed for this modern day documentary? Let's play devil's advocate. Okay, let's say Scott did go home at around 2:30 a.m. How would he have also been seen at the Furno Lodge harassing women at 3:30 a.m? This is where the two-trip theory comes into play. Many people believe that Scott Watson travelled from the Furno Lodge to his boat not once, but twice that night. Regardless of the possibility that this was mistaken identity, and regardless of the lack of DNA evidence, the local law enforcement had their man, and also so did the local media. Scott was painted by the papers as a violent sexual criminal, a thug, and we mentioned briefly his previous criminal convictions, 48, but only one of these was violent, and this was actually when he was on his boat doing some work to it. Allegedly, someone came up and tried to rob him, and when he saw the person trying to gain access to his boat, he started waving a knife at them, and then they ran away. He thought problem solved, burglars gone, but no, the boys in blue then came to charge him with assault. The Scott known to his father and his sister is a far cry from the man that was described that evening at the Furno Lodge. Several witnesses said he was making lewd comments to young women and young girls and was demanding that they have sex with him. He also made statements that he was looking to kill someone that night. By the summer of 1998, everyone in New Zealand had made their mind up about Scott Watson, and so had local law enforcement. And in June 1998, Scott Watson was charged with the murders of Olivia Hope and Ben Smart. Without any blood, any bodies, and scarce DNA evidence, the Crown prosecutor's case heavily relied on the witness testimonies taken from partygoers that New Year's Eve. Many that from January had since changed. Guy Wallace, the water taxi driver who initially stated that Scott Watson was not the man on his taxi that night, was now saying something different. He was singing a different tune and said that indeed it was Scott Watson he saw that night and he could have been mistaken about the double single-mast boat issue. New evidence also began to come to light, including that of two jailhouse confessions in which Scott Watson allegedly told two prisoners that he murdered Olivia and Ben and then disposed of their bodies in sleeping bags, weighing them down with anchors so they would plunge into the depths of the Marlborough Sounds. However, as it was proven when investigators searched the Blade that all anchors were accounted for, these claims are most likely untrue. Me, as an outsider looking into this case, I'm thinking really rough DNA work, little to no evidence of any actual murder. This guy's got to go free, right? Well, it's 1999 and anything is possible, and after an 11-week trial, Scott Watson was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Olivia Hope and Ben Smart. The courtroom guards were so convinced that Scott was going to be let free that they had actually brought a folded pile of his clothes to the court that day so he could get changed as he walked out a free man. You then had the families of Olivia Hope and Ben Smart, who still didn't have any answers. There was no bodies to bury, no gravesite to grieve at, and they were left missing their daughter, their son, their brother, their sister, forever missing. As the years after his conviction trickled by, unsurprisingly, Scott has tried to get several appeals and have his conviction overturned, all unsuccessfully. He even failed to have a royal pardon granted for his murder conviction, with the Court of Appeals stating that he's still an extremely dangerous and violent man, and if he was released, he probably would kill again. But not everyone agrees with this. Of course, his own father does not. He has lobbied for his son's innocence for the last 23 years, hoping that someday he will see the light of day outside the prison. Olivia's own father said later on that he wasn't even convinced of Scott Watson's guilt and wanted to speak with Scott, but upon his meeting with Scott in prison, he said there was certain details that Scott couldn't confirm or deny, and this led him to believe that Scott probably was hiding something about that night. Then we have the ever-changing statements of the eyewitnesses that night. Possibly most compelling was the fact that Guy Wallace, the water taxi driver, came out with a shocking revelation that his statement made in the courtroom that day that probably put Scott behind bars was total BS. He claimed that he was coerced by law enforcement because he was told he was their only chance at a conviction. They knew this guy had killed Olivia and Ben, and without him, this killer would walk free. But after self-reflection and many years of doing his own investigating into the case, he realised what a grave mistake he had made. After coming forward, Guy Wallace was a long-time advocate for the innocence of Scott Watson until his untimely suicide in March 2021. Is Scott Watson guilty? Is the right man behind bars? Or is there someone out there still walking the streets in New Zealand harbouring a secret that could hold the key to this 23-year-old mystery? Where are Olivia and Ben? For these two young friends connecting that year over their love of music and the buzz of New Year's Eve, I will always pray that they come home safely. But until then, I will always remember them as the young love-struck couple sharing a stolen kiss as the New Year bells chimed in the distance. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. Please, if you did, give it a big thumbs up. For me, it really helps my channel. If this is your first time watching, don't worry, I don't always dress like a crazy cat lady. Please hit that subscribe button. If you're wondering what I've been up to around this sexy little Christmas season, then please feel free to follow me, not home, because we all know that is illegal, on Instagram at Megan True Crime. I hope you all have an amazing new year, and I will see you in January when that comes. I'm so excited for this new chapter in 2022. Please God, it can't get any worse than 2020 and 2021, can it? Until the new year rolls in, I want to give you all a big, massive kiss and thank you for how much you've supported me this year. It's been the first full year of my channel and I cannot thank you enough. I would not be here without you. I would probably be rocking back and forth in a corner, wishing my life away. You've literally given me a reason to get up every weekend and get my makeup on and feel good about myself. So thank you so much, guys. And remember, lock your doors, don't talk to strangers. And even though I feel like this may be an upper class problem that none of us will ever be fortunate enough to experience, don't go on strangers' boats. You don't know them, no boaty, okay? See ya! Be aggressive. Be aggressive. Here we go. Be aggressive. Be aggressive.